as boas-vindas ao último painel do dia de hoje. Coronavírus, blockchain, 5G, 3 elementos que mudam o cenário de igaming. Joseph Bird, Head of BWH Partners. Joseph Bird dirige tanto a consultoria de jogos e jogos azar como a consultoria da blockchain da BWH Partners. Está classificado no prestígio guia da Chambers Fintech 2021 na área de prática jurídica da Fintech em Malta. Está também classificado como Leading Individual na área de prática da Fintech em Malta pelo Guia Legal 500MA 2021. Joe também pratica na área de esportes, corporate, IT, telecomunicações e direito da propriedade intelectual. Joe é cofundador e atualmente vice-presidente da Binalta, que é uma organização sem fins lucrativos com a missão de promover e estimular discussão sobre tecnologia de cadeias de bloqueio e moedas criptográficas em Malta. Antes de se juntar, a BWH Partners ocupou o cargo de Chief Regulatory Officer da Lotteries and Gaming Authority Malta. Josh Jones, do Salsa Technology. Josh Jones tem conduzido mudanças tecnológicas por mais de 10 anos. Ele tem vasta experiência na indústria de iGaming, trabalhando nos lados de operadora, afiliação e provedor da plataforma. Ele é responsável por todos os aspectos da tecnologia dentro do grupo.
Hi there, Joseph. Good afternoon. Nice to meet you.
Same here.
So I'm really I'm really looking forward to this talk. And a few topics lined up here, so around blockchain and around 5G, especially about blockchain, just to kick it off. So I'm aware that you're based in Malta. I know there's been a big effort to promote Malta as a blockchain island. And I know you in particular have a lot of emphasis around the regulatory part of the blockchain island. So could you just tell me a bit about the blockchain island, what it means, and the regulatory aspect around it in Malta?
Oh, yeah. During the hype of 2016-17, there were, maybe it was overhyped here, the concept of blockchain and what Malta can become for the blockchain industry in general, for the blockchain service providers in general. And this attracted a lot of attention from blockchain startups. And they all looked at Malta as one of the ideal jurisdictions to set up their base. This was before the regulations came out. Once the regulations came out, only the very, very serious operators ended up staying here. In fact, we had probably over 300 operators that were initially interested in obtaining some sort of license or approval in Malta. And once the regulations came out, this number reduced itself drastically. And to date, we only have 11 licensees, and there are another 2-3 in the pipeline. So this has been redimensioned quite significantly. But to be fair, there are some really big names in the industry that are based in Malta. Maybe they are not known so much from a retail point of view, but especially from a B2B perspective, they are quite the leaders in their field. In parallel, of course, since we are mainly, our main attraction is for the gaming industry, since we are probably the most important base for the gaming industry in Europe. Ultimately, the Gaming Authority also did an effort to come up with guidelines, which they call the sandbox, but it's not really a sandbox, in relation to operators that wish to either make use of blockchain technology within their platform, or operators that wish to accept cryptocurrencies, or both, of course. And we have a set of guidelines which is specific to operators wishing to use blockchain within their platform or accept cryptocurrencies as a form of payment. And basically, at the end of last year, at the end of 2020, we had our first licensee, which got an approval. And again, this is a big name because it's a subsidiary of Consensus, which is one of the major blockchain accelerators in the world. So, in truth, yes, Malta did not live up to the blockchain island concept, maybe, but still it managed to attract some big players, and it has a very, very sound and strong regulatory framework, which is also very comparable to what at a European Union level we're expecting in terms of regulation, especially now that the MiCA proposed regulations have been published, and our blockchain regulatory framework is particularly in line with what there is in the MiCA proposed regulation.
Mm-hmm. Blockchain is an area that seems to be advancing at the speed of light, particularly around cryptocurrencies. Not only the new cryptocurrencies, but the methods that they use, the way that they work seems to change on an almost daily basis. You know, if we're going from proof of stake to proof of work, there's different methods involved, different types of cryptography involved. How do you regulate something that's moving so quickly?
Well, the trick with regulation is also always to try to keep it as technology neutral as possible. So you have to regulate the principles, the red lines, the concepts, but you can't regulate the technology itself. So when you're designing a regulatory framework, you have to try to make it as future-proof as possible. The more future-proof it is, the more it will survive. But if we look at the gaming framework, for example, it survived 10 years before the first intervention was required. Mm-hmm. And even by then, Malta was still the leading jurisdiction in Europe and probably one of the top 3 in the world. And that was also a very smart move from the authority and from the government to actually update the regulatory framework, even though things were moving normally and well. But there was the need of actually improving the framework, and they didn't shy off from improving it. Most of all, obviously, it was spearheaded by the authority, by the Malta Gaming Authority, and which proposed to the government updates. And these updates made our framework probably foolproof for the next 10-20 years, future-proof for the next 10-20 years. So this is a very good thing to do. Another trick is to actually have a tier approach, basically a multi-tier approach where you have the main framework in the law, and then you have the more technical specifications, let's call them that way, in regulatory instruments issued by the authority that can be easily amended as time goes by. And this will make it much easier to maintain the framework in line with all the requirements of the law, all the requirements of the framework and the technology innovation.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. There have been quite a few stories of big companies that facilitate crypto trades, big markets like Mt. Gox, for example, that have gone under in the last few years with people losing millions. In some cases, markets have lost billions of dollars. What sort of regulatory frameworks does Malta have to protect consumer funds that are, for people that are investing in cryptocurrencies?
Well, this was one of the biggest headaches, of course, when designing the framework, but particularly for operators to comply with. So first and foremost, the operators were required, in order to obtain a license, to have a very high share capital. Over and above that, they are required to keep reserves in accordance with their yearly turnover. They're also required to comply with a cybersecurity framework, which was published by the authority. And they undergo regular audits to ensure that they have proper governance in place, as well as a proper cybersecurity. They are complying with the cybersecurity framework. So those are the initiatives taken by the authority and the government when they were promulgating legislation, regulation, and the regulatory instruments to try to protect the funds of the user as much as possible. At the same time, obviously, hacks are still possible, thefts are still possible. So definitely, there is no foolproof solution. But as the experience has taught us in the gaming industry, the bad apples are usually few and far between. And in over 15 years now that we've been regulating online gaming, we only had very few situations where operators left players without their money. And I'm assuming that the same will happen with blockchain, where very few, a negligent amount of people will lose their funds with Malta-regulated entities. Because obviously, once you're regulated, there are a number of checks and balances that are there, and the regulators constantly require reporting from operators and so on. So there is a level of scrutiny that makes the operator itself be more disciplined as well. So definitely, I don't see major risks when it comes to regulated entities compared to entities that are completely unregulated.
That makes sense. Another issue that's been brought up a lot recently is around corporate social responsibility or corporate social governance. One of the major aspects of blockchain and crypto in particular that I've seen criticized is the environmental impact that it causes, right? Because of the amount of resources needed to perform the calculations needed to create new cryptocurrencies or to create new coins of a certain cryptocurrency. How did Malta, when deciding its framework, manage the different stakeholders in that process?
Well, with regards to cryptocurrencies and initial offerings in particular, Malta went for an approach. First of all, you have to determine whether the currency being created is security, which in Europe we call financial instrument, or whether it is a utility cryptocurrency. Therefore, in most cases, most well-known cryptocurrencies out there clearly fall the concept of utility asset, which is basically we call it virtual financial asset in Malta, VFA. So that was the name given to these types of currencies. And this includes utility tokens as well as currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. These clearly do not fall under the framework, under the regime of securities, or as I said, financial instruments, which is the term we use in Europe. And the MFSA created a test, the Malta Financial Services Authority created a test that has to be applied to each and every currency in order to be able to determine whether it's a security or a VFA. And basically that was the first step. Then the second step was when it comes to initial coin offerings, they came up with a specific framework with the requirement of the registration of a white paper with the authority. The registration involves a number of approvals before the actual white paper is actually registered. So in truth, it's like obtaining some sort of approval similar to what someone issuing securities would require in terms of the prospectus and so on, but it is tailor-made specifically for cryptocurrencies. So even the requirements of disclosure are very different from what they are for securities because they are more specific to the nature of cryptocurrencies. That was the approach taken. And from that, obviously, you start seeing that the effect is always towards the more transparency, more governance, more legal certainty, of course, for operators and people that are actually issuing cryptocurrencies, also for service providers that are dealing with those cryptocurrencies. So this allowed the creation of a very good base, I would say. And if we look at what is being proposed at the European Union level, we will see that it basically mimics what Malta has created. So that for me that is proof that the framework in Malta is quite good.
So you mentioned one point that I find very interesting, which is around transparency, and it's something that's been spoken a lot in the context of cryptocurrencies and of blockchains. There's two sides of this argument, really. I think the first one is the people that say it's totally anonymous, it can't be tracked, and it's a hotbed for money laundering, essentially. And then there's the people on the other side that are saying no, because every transaction is recorded, everything is on the blockchain, so it's actually one of the most transparent methods that you can use. So I know that at the European level, there's been lots of discussion about anonymous wallets, because that was one of the sore points that, okay, every transaction is on the blockchain, it's recorded, but if you don't know who actually owns the wallet and who's receiving the funds at the end of the day, if they can be anonymous, there's no transparency there. So I want to know from you, is Malta addressing that within the regulatory framework? Are they enforcing the wallets? They can't be held anonymously. Do you have to provide KYC information, for example, when holding funds in cryptocurrencies?
So yes, of course, when people hold their funds in cold wallets, it's obviously very difficult to understand who they belong to. And in a way, that is particularly good also for the security of that person, because if everyone knows that Mr. X has, if Mr. X has $20 million dollars in cryptocurrencies, that puts Mr. X in jeopardy. So it is very true that it is good, in my opinion, that wallets are anonymous. Of course, investigators, if they want to find who that person is, with the tools that are available today, it is not that difficult for law enforcement agencies to get to know who actually owns that wallet. Why? Because this wallet would have transacted with other wallets throughout its lifetime. And with chain analysis and with the cooperation of exchanges, police can basically get to know always who actually owns that wallet. Well, not always. There are situations like anonymous currencies, so the privacy coins, what we call privacy coins, where this makes it particularly difficult to track, because there isn't an audit trail available to the public. So what happened is that in Malta, and the same is being basically mimicked at European level, service providers are sort of, not directly, but indirectly banned from dealing with privacy coins. And therefore, the aim here is to say, look, privacy coins exist, yeah, right? We understand that, but if you want to get a license from a proper jurisdiction and operate your exchange or your OTC desk or your brokerage in a regulated fashion, then you need to make sure that all the currencies that you're dealing with are traceable. And that basically wipes out all the privacy coins.
Mm-hmm. What do you see the major regulatory battlegrounds being over the next 5 years?
Well, definitely, the industry is much more mature than it was before, but it's still not mature enough to have a voice, a serious voice in front of regulators. There are a few companies here and there in the industry that are gaining respect from legislators and regulators, and they are becoming a bit more influential, but it's not enough. So until we have a group of really serious operators like Coinbase, like some other big companies that are in this space that maybe are not known so much in the retail part, but are particularly strong in the B2B part, I say that unless they start creating some form of association between them and having one voice to discuss with legislators and regulators, it's going to be a constant battle. But once they have this common voice that they can convey to regulators and legislators, I believe that it's going to be hard for them to educate legislators and regulators. And before there is this process of education, it's going to be very difficult for them to get favorable regulatory frameworks. Because obviously regulators and legislators are not knowledgeable enough on this space, and it's going to be a constant battle to try to explain, especially in a divided voice, the good practices that should be basically instilled in these regulatory frameworks, and convince the powers that be that blockchain is not an evil thing, but rather it's a massive innovation for humankind, and we can take advantage of it and make use of it in a way that will facilitate the life of individuals. It will create more wealth, and it will give opportunities to people that today don't have the proper opportunities to basically take full advantage of their capabilities.
So you mentioned wealth creation there, which is an interesting topic, because a general trend is, at least the major cryptocurrencies, they've increased in value. If you look at Bitcoin, for example, over the last 10 years, sure, there's some ups and downs, but as an overall trend, it's gone up. There's been many countries that have taken more of a hazardous approach, let's say, and they've warned citizens against investing too much, just because of the national risks and the exposure in case there's too big a fluctuation. If the price drops, essentially, it reduces wealth in a population. Is this something that Malta is looking at or is trying to address through regulatory means? The restriction of investments, for example, or limitations on the amount that an individual can invest?
There are some limitations, although when I was talking about wealth, I wasn't specifically referring to actually trading cryptocurrencies, but rather the democratization of many services that today are unfortunately run by institutions that have no competition. And through blockchain, we will be able to circumvent the need of these organizations that are in-betweens and that are obviously generating a lot of wealth for themselves, but are not generating prosperity for mankind. And this is all a paraphrasing of a comment from Dan Tapscott when he was explaining what blockchain is a few years back. And but speaking of trading, yes, in Malta we have some limitations, particularly when it comes to retail investors that are not knowledgeable enough. So a number of tests have to be done in order to allow traders to be able to trade certain high amounts. And this works particularly well similarly to what is used in normal trading platforms for securities. And the same concept has been adopted for cryptocurrency trading. So regulated entities will need to stick to these requirements. Doesn't mean that people that don't have experience cannot trade, but obviously there are certain limitations that apply to them. But we're not talking of hard and fast limitations with an amount of money, because again, that would be a mistake for the simple reason that not everyone, 100 euros for me might not mean the same as 100 euros for you. So setting a limit of 100 euros, just to throw a number here, does not necessarily protect you, but it might overprotect me, or vice versa. So it is regulatory frameworks try to address this by requiring a certain level of acquired knowledge over time also.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a sensible approach. And you touched on it a bit, and the difference in value between one person and another that, say, 100 euros could have. And I draw parallels to Sweden and the gaming legislation that they have there, where they had fixed and hard rules, on deposit limits, for example. To me, didn't seem to make much sense, but I'm not the only one that seems to think
it's a discussion topic that we've been looking at for many years, especially in the gaming industry, and there's no way that it can make sense, because not everyone has the same means. And if you say, okay, the maximum is 10,000 euros per month, fine. For one person, 10,000 euros per month might mean nothing, while for another person, can never afford 10,000 euros per month. So it would still damage that person. And generally, these rules are made to protect the most vulnerable persons, and the most vulnerable persons might not even afford that limit. So you're not getting anything out of these limits. You are simply creating a mess.
I agree. I'm glad I'm not the only one that sees it that way. You mentioned an interesting word before, which was democratization, which is something that's used a lot in the space of blockchain and particularly crypto. I've seen the emergence recently of state coins. So in China, for example, and numerous other central banks that I've seen releasing their own coins, which is something that I find hard to understand from a philosophical point of view, when you're having something that's meant to be democratized, that's not meant to be run by a single agency or entity. How do you see the state coins fitting in with the whole ecosystem?
I see it as a very positive step in general, for the simple reason that once states start issuing their own coins, automatically there will be much more uptake and much more there will be mass adoption of cryptocurrency. Now, many people, for example, criticize Libra, okay, the Facebook coin, which now has changed its name to something else. The name is escaping me. But I was rooting for Libra. I was really let down when the Libra project got redimensioned. Because Libra, it's true, it would have given a lot of power to those companies that were behind it. But still, it was going to create a mass adoption in the space that would have changed everything. And I was very let down when that project sort of failed. I know that it seems something is being created still, but it's nowhere near what that project was aiming to be. At the same time, I still believe that even though there are a ton of problems coming with government currencies, and many argue that that's not a cryptocurrency, it is simply a digitization of the euro or the dollar. But in truth, it's still going to help the mass adoption of cryptocurrencies, in my view. And definitely, at the end of the day, what is best for the people will ultimately win. And if cryptocurrencies continue to offer a better alternative to people compared to the traditional currencies, then so be it, and the cryptocurrencies will be more popular. But the fact that governments will have to actually issue their own, let's call it cryptocurrency, although some crypto enthusiasts will definitely not agree with me that these are cryptocurrencies, I believe that this will help a lot in mass adoption. It also proves that the concept behind cryptocurrencies is a good concept because governments now have to do them. So I see only the positives in this.
Interesting. Like you said, I think there's many people that would disagree, but I understand that point of view, and I think it makes sense. I think for the general community, if it helps drive adoption, I think that that's a good thing. And to be honest, I don't see a way of driving adoption without the support of states, especially in countries like China. So I agree completely on that. Thanks for all your oversight, all your insights here into the world of blockchain and cryptocurrency. We had another topic today that we were going to discuss, and it was around 5G. I know you've got some experience previously working Vodafone around this area. I wanted to understand from a regulatory point of view. I understand it's probably not as complex as blockchain, or at least as heavily regulated probably as blockchain is. But I understand that there's been, the past year or so, lots of geopolitical considerations when considering 5G. First of all, being such a critical infrastructure inside of Europe. There's many companies from China, for example, that are investing heavily into 5G in Europe, and there's been many concerns around that. I want to know from your point of view and from Malta's point of view, if you could just talk about any regulations that are in place to combat this threat from countries outside of Europe to stop their stranglehold that they have over infrastructure in Europe, if any.
Well, I was at Vodafone, to be fair, when 3G was being introduced, and I remember that there was quite a discussion like, but do we need all this speed? Because obviously the use of the mobile at the time was very different from the use of the mobile today. And the use of the mobile in 5-10 years' time will be very different from what the use is today, but always going forward. So I believe that every development brings with it an improvement. I believe it's going to be a massive improvement for gaming, particularly, and any other online digital services that make use of the internet, of course. So especially those that are very graphics hungry. And I definitely believe that 5G is going to be a massive step forward, and I'm really looking forward to it basically really taking up and being used everywhere. At the same time, yes, the concern about infrastructure is a reasonable concern, I would say. But I believe that regulators, rather than being too worried about this, should actually come up with solutions which allow them to ensure that the equipment is safe. So the moment that we have certainty that the equipment is not being tampered with, that there's no one controlling that equipment outside of the companies that are actually running the network locally, and that also something else that has been mentioned a lot, the potential harm that the waves of 5G antennas could produce, which again, it's a discussion that has been going on since 2G and 1.5G. So it's not a new argument here. So it's something that definitely has always been around the telecoms industry. But again, I believe that authorities and regulators should have the necessary tools and capabilities to ensure that this equipment is safe. The moment that we know that it's safe from all angles, I see no issue with it. Actually, I'm super excited about it. Unfortunately, in Europe, it's still not widespread enough, but I am aware that in the US, it's very widespread already. I don't know in LATAM how the uptake is, but I'm definitely excited about it and looking forward to what we're going to be doing with our mobiles in 5-6 years' time.
If you were to make a prediction on the most interesting thing that we'll be doing with 5G in 5 years, what do you think it will be?
Well, I believe that mobiles are going to replace many things that today we use. Now, when I say mobiles, I'm not speaking of the traditional mobiles that we use today, but I'm expecting that in 5-10 years' time, the mobile will be something different. Whether it's going to be a watch, whether it's going to be something else, I don't know, but definitely it's going to be something different from what we have today. And but let's keep on calling it mobile. And the mobile is going to change our lives completely. And definitely it's going to replace, I would say that eventually, I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years time, it's going to replace the laptop, definitely. There's no reason why I should carry a laptop with me when I can have everything on my mobile and on the cloud, and I can actually project a keyboard and a screen from my device and actually use it as a laptop. So definitely, I'm seeing a massive innovation in that space, and it will become the norm. In 10 years' time, we will all be using whatever it is, and we will not have 5G by then, but probably 6G, and we will be doing things that we can't even imagine now that we do that we will do with our mobile. And as I said, when I say mobile, I'm not limiting myself to the traditional old device. Let's call it old. But I'm talking about a mobile device that we carry with us all the time and that will allow us to be in contact with the world through wherever we are.
Absolutely. I think you're right about that. The evolution of mobile is, as we see it now, probably in the next 5 or so years is not going to exist. You know, the sort of haptic feedback that you spoke about and using whatever texture is in front of you. It could be on your hand, for example, where you project a keyboard. I can see that as well. Elon Musk as well with the chips, you've probably seen it or not, the brain implants as well is probably another indication of where things might be going. Again, no physical device in your hand, but imagine if you have a brain chip inside you connecting to 5G, what sort of capabilities that brings. It's almost scary to think about where we could be maybe in 5 or 10 years if that comes to light. One of the topics that's been for the last 2 years, ever since the start of Corona, that's been on everyone's lips has been working from home. And should people work from home? Can they? You know, the quality of internet maybe people have in their homes. How do you think that 5G is going to change that balance between working in the office and working at home?
Well, definitely it will reduce the need of meeting physically. Although I believe that that the need of meeting physically will always be there, but it will be reduced. So the experience of meeting physically can never be 100% replaced by technology, I would say. And that applies to the office, and it applies to conferences in particular, and it applies to anything else that you can imagine, so traveling and so on and so forth, meetings. But how many times nowadays we say, oh, let's do a meeting online, and we get things done without the need of actually going and meeting in person. So I believe that a good 70 to 80% of our meetings before could have easily been done online.
Mm-hmm.
There are a good 20-30% that won't have the same effect online compared to having them in person, but that reduces a good 70% of our physical meetings. Same with conferences. I would say that a good 40% of the conferences that I used to attend before Corona, I will not attend them anymore. If there's a hybrid solution, I would attend the hybrid solution. However, with conferences, the most important part is not actually speaking, but it's actually meeting people and interacting. Until now, no one has really invented a way how to network properly online, and I think it's very difficult to find a way to do that because the physical connection is very important in networking. So I believe that networking will still remain something that we have to do in person. But definitely a number of business meetings can be done easily online and don't need physical presence. And you can imagine how much that would save us in terms of time and money.
I can imagine the cost of certain events these days, especially in the gaming industry, companies spending in surplus of a few €100,000 for each events. They can come up to €1 million budget across the year when you're looking multiple events, especially for those tier one operators. So absolutely, I think there'll be some CFOs that are quite happy about the current state of things and definitely addressing where they stand in the coming years, I would say. So thanks a lot for your time, Joseph. I'm aware that time now is coming in towards the final few minutes of the time that we had scheduled, but I just wanted to take it back a bit to the blockchain conversation that we had and just to hear some closing remarks from you on operators or companies in general that are looking to invest in blockchain. What would you say to them?
Well, definitely ideally, the best way of investing is by getting to know the project very well, ensuring that the project makes sense, that it brings added value, and ideally wait for that project to be already funded by some more experienced investors. So the moment that you see certain experienced investors on board, the project should be safer because those investors will not throw away their money. They do take risks, definitely, because in business, unless you take risks, you will never make money. But they take calculated risks. So the moment that you see these projects that are being funded by a certain level of investor, I believe that they are much safer than going to an unknown startup who is just promoting itself online.
Indeed, there's different levels of risk here, and I guess it will depend on one's appetite.
Also a different level of reward, by the way. Absolutely. So definitely, if you invest in a project before the big shots start investing in it, and the project does well, you will earn much more, but you're taking a much bigger risk, of course.
On the closing remarks, then, how do you see NFTs fitting into this? You talk about the high risk and high reward. They definitely seem to be in that category. What's your opinion?
Well, look, there is a hype around NFTs. So most NFTs that we're seeing today are gimmicks, but I really believe that NFTs could be something big, and there are so many opportunities that NFTs bring around. The problem with NFTs is that unlike normally cryptocurrencies, I would say that a good 60-70% of NFTs that we're seeing could possibly be securities rather than cryptocurrencies. Mm-hmm. So it really depends what the NFT represents. If it represents a virtual horse or a virtual player card or something of the sort, then it's most likely a normal cryptocurrency. It should be treated not as a security. But the moment that the NFT is representing some real asset, then it is very likely that that NFT is a security. And if the NFT is a security, operators in particular should be very worried about complying with the regulatory frameworks especially from where they are launching such NFTs. So it is tricky, and we're going to see some blood, I would say, in this space. But I really believe that NFTs have some potential that could really change things as we know them in certain areas.
Amazing. I think that's a good note of optimism to end the conversation on. It's been a pleasure talking to you and hearing all of the thoughts. It's been very insightful for me, so I'm sure it will be for everybody else. Thanks for your time, and I hope we do this again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Muito obrigado por ter participado no nosso evento CGS Brasil. Temos o maior prazer em ajudá-lo através do nosso website ou nosso correio. Isabelle Verde se despede de você.